Welcome to a football show. That is Paul Kuharsky. I am Braden Gall, brought to you by Sinkers Beverages and Shotgun Willie's Barbecue. Make sure you check out two award-winning local businesses here in Nashville, Tennessee that support good local products like this, like paulkuharsky.com, and like your favorite sports teams, including the Tennessee Titans. PK, good morning. Good to see you. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. How you doing?
I'm doing great. We are not live, of course, as you can tell, on this Monday afternoon. I have to be at the Barry Trotz press conference, so that already happened. So maybe there's still a coach for the Nashville Predators at the time of the release of this. But I did have a question from an avid supporter and listener, PK, that you met at, of course, the Sinkers Beverages Draft Watch Party last 2 weekends ago, I guess. And a question about identity. And I think we had some players talk last week about sort of what this team could look like, whether it's Xavier Woods or Peter Skoronski or Brian Callahan. So we've got a lot of clips for you guys from last week on Thursday that we're going to kind of react to. But really, they're questions about the team that we need to talk about that I think the video sort of set up for us and kind of create some of the entrance into those conversations. So we're going to do that today. We're going to talk about Brian Callahan and what's actually happening right now. What are they actually trying to accomplish with this rookie class and with the team itself and the coaching staff? What takes place during this part of the calendar year. We're going to talk, Peter Skaransky is going to talk about year number 2 under Bill Callahan and the offensive line. Is this finally the year that we get it fixed? Expectations for Cam Ward. What is the identity of the team, as I already mentioned, and lots of other stuff to do on the show today. We do apologize again for not being live. That's just a part of how the scheduling worked out. It's a once
all Braden's fault.
It is. And it's sort of a once every now and then we have this stuff happen, and it just has to happen right now. Last week, unfortunately, Nick and I were put off because the mayor had to be at the mayor's speech. So there's just all kinds of stuff happening right now. We should get into a routine here pretty soon. Make sure you check out Sinkers Beverages for all of your beverage needs, be it alcohol, be it non-alcohol, be it THC beverage, be it the craft beer Retailer of the Year award-winning beer fridge over there at Sinkers Beverages, 4-time liquor store of the year. Make sure you check them out. Sign up for the in-crowd. It's a great way to sort of get some of the inside the club information and allocations and access to stuff that you can't get elsewhere. So make sure you check that out. Tastings, barrel picks, all kinds of cool stuff. So make sure you check them out. Shotgun Willie's Barbecue, 11 to 3, Wednesday, not today or Tuesday, but Wednesday through Sunday from 11 a.m. till 3 p.m. or until that meat sells out. Okay. You want to start with sort of what's going on right now, PK, in terms of what's actually happening. Brian Callahan, we're going to use his video here. He said he talked about sort of the types of players that he's looking for and the types of coaches he needs to be and sort of the relationships they're trying to build, some of the communications and the expectations. So we'll start here, PK, with Brian Callahan. This is from Thursday of last week, talking about sort of what's happening right now with the Titans.
We're looking for the same types of players. We want big, fast, intelligent, high character, all the things that you look for in a player are all the things we all want, and now it's just finding them and then developing them, and that's our job. We got to do a great job of putting those guys in position to continue to improve. But I think we see what the type of player we want. I think we see it the same, and that's, I don't know that that's necessarily changed from our perspective. I think we all want those things all the time, and so we just keep hammering away at it. But they've done a great job communicating with us, I think, is the biggest thing, and just what the process is, how they want it to look, and what our role is in it. And I think that's all anybody really wants at the end of the day is to know exactly what's expected and let us go do it.
Okay. Echoing the front office from their press conference earlier in the week, of course, about the type of players they want, the type of Titans they're going to recruit or draft or sign. What is your takeaway on the process here and the type of player that they are now clearly on? They're all on message on this one for sure.
Well, development, right? And Mike Herndon has a very good piece up at paulkuharsky.com. And one of the things he talks about is traits over production. We've hit on this. Ideally, you'd like both traits and production. Those players disappear pretty quickly at the top of the draft. You can ask questions about Oladejo here. Because he doesn't have both, and he was your second round pick. But traits over production leaves you in a position where your coaching staff is obligated and your franchise philosophy is to develop these guys. Now, that's a very Green Bay philosophy. You're a Packers guy. Matt LaFleur and his staff and staffs prior in a organization that's had a lot of success with this have proven to be able to develop guys, a high percentage of guys, not everybody. I mean, there are guys that did not pan out for the Packers and are big disappointments, right? But generally, a high enough percent of the roster there gets developed for them to be a regular playoff team. Now, not enough for them to be a Super Bowl team. But, you know, with Callahan having had such a poor debut, bad roster, but poor debut, and his staff, you're putting a lot on them developing. Now, you're also maybe saying that's a disposable element of your team. If this staff isn't able to develop, you can get another staff that is able to develop. Like, you get what I'm saying? You can get a developing staff and you still have players who have these traits that are developable.
I think I know what you're saying.
Yeah, right. As opposed to this idea that, like, oh my God, if you have to fire this staff, there's this massive restart and everything's bad. I think it'd be a bad thing if this staff gets fired, but I think that's the way the front office maybe views it. These are good players with good traits that can be developed. Now, if Brian Callahan and his staff can't develop them, we're confident they definitely can be developed. But it's interesting that production didn't matter so much universally. I mean, Cam Ward had great production, right? And some of these guys had the production. But if you look across this class generally, you would say they didn't favor production as a trait.
We talked a little bit about this on Monday last week after the front office spoke, and that was sort of the refrain from the front office. Winston didn't play a lot, but as a really good player and could be developed. Oladejo didn't play a lot at that position, moved, but is good. A lot of upside is going to be developed. I think I agree with that, but let's kind of spin the conversation to another analogy here, because it does because I agree with your point, which is we want to set the franchise rebuild in motion here. They don't want to use that word. Chad Brinker has said as much to Nick actually at the combine, but that's kind of what they've let it loose here on accident that's how they're viewing this, or on purpose. So I think their goal through these types of players and this strategy is to put the franchise rebuild step 1 and 2 in place, to your point, no matter what else happens, right? Insulate the trajectory of the rebuild from what may or may not happen with the coaching staff.
Yeah, and I should say, just interjecting, resetting the coaching staff is a setback in the development because you have to restart. But it's not I think in what I'm saying, it's not a death blow. The guys have the traits to be developed. If this staff unfortunately can't develop them, they would believe somebody else can.
Well, and because this audience is so smart and awesome and can handle nuanced conversations, I want to go back to the first couple of years with John Robinson, because what happened is actually what we're talking about, right? John Robinson takes over a really, really bad roster. Other than maybe, I guess, if you want to talk about the drafting of Mariota, I'm not talking about the end result of his career, but at the time he was his number 2 overall pick and he had a good rookie season. So he takes over a really bad roster, but with a quarterback, similar to what we've got now with this Titans team. Bad roster, but with a quarterback now. And what's interesting is that the decision making and the strategy around building the roster, it did lead to a coaching transition, not for bad reasons, but it led to a coaching transition just 2 years into it, Brinker's second year, and then that's when the trajectory started to escalate on the bell curve or whatever after the change to Vrabel. Some of that's Vrabel's ability and talent. Do you see any parallels, similarities to some of the decision making? I think about Ben Jones as an example, going to get a Ben Jones type of player as one of the first things that John Robinson did. He, big draft class, of course, trading out for the number of a pick, drafts Conklin, Rashard Matthews, Rashad Johnson, nobody great, but guys like kind of stabilizing forces. Is that how am I crazy to see the parallels here or not?
Maybe there are some, but I think more in terms of they had numbers out of trading out of number 1. So they had a lot of numbers there. That helps you land Derrick Henry, when you've got 3 second-round picks there. In what was it, Austin Johnson, Kevin Dodd, and Derrick Henry. So you got 3 shots to really land, and you land a bust. This is kind of what you would expect. You land a bust, a good serviceable player, and
Hall of Famer.
And a Hall of Fame caliber guy.
But isn't it weird though? Like if you really think about Brinker, not Rand obviously, but Brinker, high first 2 overall pick quarterback in the first 2 years of his draft. He takes over, has the number 1 pick in his second season, right? Like that's sort of how it's very similar, really awful. One of the worst rosters in the NFL in 2015, one of the worst rosters in the NFL in 2024. I don't know. Maybe again, I'm probably reading.
Well, I'm thinking too about Mularkey. So where does the Mularkey idea fit in here? Mularkey was a stabilizer who got them to respectability, and then they said, we need better than this. We can go up a notch from here. So is Callahan going to be the stabilizer, and then they get somebody a notch up from that? I don't know. Or is Callahan going to be both Mularkey and Vrabel in their eyes, not to attach him to either of them? He hasn't done what either of them have done. And I think both of us agree he's got a long way to go to show that he's Vrabel as a game day coach, or a practice coach, but we'll see where he is on that scale.
I think his personality is stabilizing in the building following Vrabel. And I think that has certainly been the case in the first year and a half. And I think will be the case moving forward. I think your question is valid about Callahan. If you hired him when you did, and with his resume, with his background, the upside is what you were eventually hiring. You knew you were going to get it right out of the box. Like that's just almost irrational. But I hadn't thought about it as Callahan as both characters in the movie here. I hadn't thought about that. But that does, in this true analogy, he's getting fired after 2 years, but he was a stabilizing force culturally. And they go get somebody with major upside or whatever, Vrabel style. But Vrabel didn't have any of that track record when he was hired either. So I guess maybe you're hoping that he's both characters, that he's the stabilizing cultural personality that changes things like relationships with families and travel, stuff like that, where the players grade it much higher, changes some of that stuff because he's listening to the players, has more of a player-friendly relationship, and then becomes the offense, develops into one of these, McVay, Shanahan, LaFleur wizards on offense, and then gives you the upside with the new quarterback in year 3 or whatever.
See, you opened the door to a very interesting thing. Let's talk about this culture gone bad. When did the culture go bad? Because the culture didn't go bad in my eyes from the coaching side of it. Mike Vrabel had a good locker room. He had guys that were his guys who ran a pretty good, who bought in to the coaching plan, who loved this idea of if we do these 3 things, we'll win. And they saw the results of it. The culture went bad because the guys he was asking to do these things were incapable of doing these things. And the tree from which he was pulling the leaves, if you will, the bad, terrible analogy, but you get what I'm saying. Where he was pulling things from, the resources were no longer there. And so to me, this culture that they're trying to fix, the personnel people are trying to fix it, and they're trying to fix the problems of the previous personnel people, not of the coach. The coach got fired more so off of his commanding personality and their perceived inability of him to do the kumbaya. And what was the phrase there? What was their key word there was
collaboration.
Collaboration. So his perceived inability to collaborate is the reason that he's not out. Not the other C word, not the culture word. The culture fix has to do with the previous GM and the end of the GM before him. But it wasn't really the coach that couldn't get it together. It was the personnel, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with that. I do think, though, and this is true about life because life is nuanced. Like, I don't think Vrabel caused the culture problem, but Vrabel was a part of a toxic relationship with the general manager. And there was
right. That's franchise culture as opposed to locker room culture.
Yes, that's what I'm getting at. Like, to me, Amy was a little volatile at that time. The GM was volatile. The head coach was volatile because the recipe didn't work. Right, the recipe as a whole didn't work, and so therefore it was chaotic. I'm just going to use that word for lack of a better term. It probably didn't feel that way, like on a day-to-day basis interacting with people, but it didn't feel like there was any cohesive vision and plan. And I do think Brian Callahan, again, just from being around him, you've been around him more than I have, but he feels like a stabilizing presence in all areas of the building, if that makes sense. Yeah. And I'm not saying that's his job. I'm not saying that's what he's hired to do. His job is to call plays and teach the quarterback to throw the ball accurately and on time. But like, he just felt like someone who was willing to listen, be a little bit more player friendly. I'm not even saying that that's a negative thing for Vrabel, but for whatever reason, it's not any one person's fault. It was chaotic, and toxic is probably too strong, but it was a little off, and it just needed sort of a little bit of a clean slate. And I think Callahan does bring in a stability sort of mentally to everybody around him. And that's just sort of my perspective of him. And so Mularkey feels very unoffensive, right? As a hire, like no upside. I remember driving in the car, not covering the Titans when it happened, driving around Nashville, hearing the news going like, that's what they're going to do. You know, like that just thinking like, oh, okay, whatever. I guess that's a thing they could do. Like, it's very unoffensive. Doesn't get you excited. Doesn't get you upset. And Callahan is sort of in that same personality type. Doesn't get me offended at all, but I'm not sure about the upside yet. Their hope is he develops that, obviously, and that's their belief. But I do think it feels like there are some, like, let's turn the cruise ship in the right direction after kind of going off course for a few years, and let's get the whole thing going in the right direction together. And that does feel like what Robinson did at the beginning of his time and what Brinker and Borgonzi are trying to do right now. Half last year, but not really, and mostly this year. And we'll see if Callahan can do it. So, all right.
I'm getting a lot of good ideas to expand on to right here. The parallel in that, and here's an awkward, like maybe a strain on this whole system. You've got players you want to develop while you're asking the coaching staff to develop simultaneously. Typically, you would have, okay, we're giving I don't want to say veteran because Callahan's he's not a veteran in terms of head coaching, but he's got experience.
He's been around a lot.
They're not all raw. His dad's certainly not raw, but you're giving a head coach with some developing coaches, developing players, and you're asking them all to develop simultaneously. Typically, you'd rather be giving developing players to a staff to Sean McVay. You've developed guys. Here's a new crop of people to develop. To Bill Parcells.
Here's an idea on this, because McVay, although Shanahan took some time to develop in San Francisco after the first half of the season, but he goes and gets Garoppolo, and like a light bulb switches and it goes on. Dan Campbell famously took a long time to develop as a coach. Vrabel did not really take that long, but he also stepped into a better situation than Callahan. There could be part of this that I'm being unfair to Brian Callahan in the situation, saying he needs to develop. It could have been he was just dealt a real shit hand last year. He would have been better with Cam Ward and Dan Moore and Kevin Zeitler and JC Latham and Peter. You know what I'm saying? Like, he could have been better. So maybe that's unfair of me to even assume that he needs to develop.
But there were things there with the penalties, with some of the process that showed you he was a rookie coach.
All right. So I think that's the first part. And actually, this gets into what Xavier Woods had to say, which is he was sort of comparing. I guess he was asked to compare and kind of contrast the situations in Carolina and the situation here. First-year coach with a first-year player. And it was interesting along the lines of our conversation just now that he had some thoughts to say about the differences in Brian Callahan just already being here. Do you want to
let me be transparent real quick. I took these clips off of the press conference from home because I foolishly was not at this press conference.
Mea culpa there from PK. PK.com, everybody. All right, here's Xavier Woods talking about the differences.
Honestly, that was different. That was a different situation. Here, Cam's coming into a coaching staff has been here. Coaching staff, I'm not saying that the coaching staff in Carolina didn't have a plan, but the plan has already been in place because he's been here. He has guys that know the system already. Coaches that doesn't have to learn the system, actually go out and see the players play to know what works and what doesn't work. Not saying that what happened there, but as a new coaching staff, and you're meshing different schemes together, you kind of got to get out there and perform it to see if it works or not. So I would just say that he's going to have some consistency. He has a coaching staff that's been here, coaching Cal, who knows what he's doing, has been successful at it. And so I just say rely on that, and then rely on the vets that you have, whether it's in the quarterback room, the receiver room. Lockett was just here. Locket's played with some guys. Locket's been to the heights of this league, and so just rely on the vets that he has.
All right, so I'm thinking through the conversation we just had, and now thinking about him. And the question is, and this is from one of the listeners, but it's a great question, and I want to get into this, which is sort of what is the new identity of the Tennessee Titans? I know that's an overused word, but Herndon wrote about it a little bit in your piece at PK.com. But sort of piggybacking off what we just talked about, it does feel like the entire era we just went through, starting in 16 with John Robinson and Mularkey into Vrabel into Carthon. It feels like that was like if you told most fans, hey, you're going to go from the first pick in the draft to the number 1 seed and in the second year an AFC Championship game or vice versa over a 6 or 7 year period, it's going to burn hot, it's going to burn fun, and then it's going to burn out, which is kind of what happened. Most fans, I think, would take that over a 6 or 7 year span of time. Now, if you're the Packers or the Steelers or teams that have been established and they kind of are good all the time, maybe not, but most teams, I think, would take that. If you're talking about the next step in the maturation process as an organization, isn't the next step to sort of have that same level of growth and that trajectory and that burn, but to do it under control and to do it with less volatility and to do it with a modern offensive system, which is clearly, to me, the story of Cam Ward and Brian Callahan, which is the Titans are trying to be, from an identity standpoint, a more modern professional football team with a pass-first, quarterback-centric identity for the first time maybe in their entire existence.
Yeah, of course. What you want, I mean, presume it's the same cycle because the Titans are the Titans and I mean, you don't presume it's the same cycle. What you really want is for Cam Ward to be a great quarterback and to lift you to new heights and for you to have a Cam Ward era, despite never minding who replaces him at the end of this, but for it to be, at least Joe Burrow-ish. Now, Joe Burrow hasn't managed, and the Bengals haven't managed to maximize him yet. It did take them to a Super Bowl. They are regularly a playoff-ish team. They haven't quite figured it out. They're in the peak of figuring it out, right? More than Joe Burrow, Josh Allen. Yeah, you take that, right? The Bills still haven't broken through to go to a Super Bowl. I think you're really dreaming if you're thinking Patrick Mahomes. I think Borgonzi didn't have quite enough of a governor when he was talking about that, though he did, say it, but we're talking Patrick Mahomes. So that's the ideal scenario. But in your very good setup, say, hey, if they have another 10-year cycle here where you're going from the first pick in the draft to the first seed in the AFC and a championship game to the first pick in the draft, how do they do better in that meaty part of it? That's the question. They have to better maximize the maximum. And, there was a lot that went wrong there where they couldn't, where that number 1 seed, they bombed the way the Titans do in the playoffs sometimes in a home game. Home playoff games for the Tennessee Titans have not been a great thing unless Joe Nedney's kicking a field goal twice.
And that's not a unique thing to just the Titans, by the way. Like, there's lots of teams that have the 1 seed or the 2 seed that fail. Like Baltimore. Yeah. Baltimore has been famously in this situation. So yeah, Packers have done that a lot.
And there are lots of teams that go on the surprising run when you're not really expected to be great, but don't get all the way to the Super Bowl. And so I think that's an interesting exercise. Like what has to go better for you to do that? And it's rare too, correct me if I'm wrong, that a Titan-like team breaks through and goes and wins. Like the Falcons were almost there and they blew their lead.
I mean, the Lions are there right now. The Lions are in the window right now. And if they don't win the Super Bowl, they will have been a version of the Titans in that window. In theory.
Who goes and wins once? It's pretty kind of rare that you're listing the teams and it's not a Ravens like team, or Steelers haven't won in a long time.
Seattle count with, or is that still quarterback?
Seattle kind of counts because they should have turned into a team that won multiple, and they didn't.
Honestly, the Packers might be in this. They got the one in 2010 and then never really delivered. Now they were much better. They were really good for a long time, but
Bucks, 2 times kind of did it, but that they did it 2 times in 2 different things makes them a different kind of team.
All right. Well, here's the other. We'll kind of continue to unravel this, because this is what I'm thinking, and it's hard to articulate it, especially kind of live here in the moment.
Cincinnati would have busted through once if they won.
Yes, exactly.
But most of the time, the teams, and I'm just doing this off the top of my head, but a lot of times the teams that bust through once get there and lose.
I am curious. I think the experiment here is going to be Washington. Right, they go from the number 2 pick to the number 29 pick because they've gotten all the great draft classes, right? 2 in a row. Now, so here's what I'm thinking, and this is maybe just, again, this is just the early Titans, in particular Fisher, feels like everything was a little too, like they were a little too patient with everything, not how to build, but also the play calling and the style, which was appropriate for that time of NFL football. And then they kind of did things a little too fast and too chaotically with Robinson and Vrabel and the stuff that they had to change to get. It was unusual, right? You change a coach after winning a playoff game. You change quarterbacks who had been solid but not great in the middle of a season to a guy that had never really been that good, and all of a sudden you shoot to the moon. And
one there was, I mean, they both turned out to be good things.
Right. Well, right. And so what I'm saying is it feels like everything was a little too slow early on, the first 15 years, let's say. Some of that, again, was era. But some of that was the style that the Titans want to be, which was this sort of physical ground and pound. That's their identity, right? We're asking about identity. Then it felt like they almost swung too far the other direction to some degree. And now it needs to be similar to Vrabel, but with a little bit more patience of the beginning era, but with a quarterback and a coach who designs offenses, right? Like I'm not saying that this makes sense perfectly, but it feels like if you just take a little bit of the chaos. And some of that, look, I like Vrabel a lot. I think he's a very good coach, and I know you do too. But some of his personality is a little bit on edge. He likes to keep people on edge. That's part of his motivation. And that's not necessarily, I don't think, how Callahan plucks the strings on folks. I think it's just a little different. And so the question is have you built something sustainable? Now, a lot of these examples we're talking about, Jaden Daniels, Jared Goff, Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, Joe Burrow, we're talking about the quarterback hitting, right? Like if Cam Ward hits, then we can have this conversation. If Cam Ward doesn't, then this entire conversation is almost not irrelevant, but like they're back to square one again.
I think if Callahan is a hit, ultimately, if he has a longer tenure here, a Vrabel-esque, 6 years, part of the promise of it is that he's talked about wanting guys to be excited to come into the building. And, I think guys maybe are more excited to come into the building. It's hard to be excited to come into the building when you're not winning, right? But if he gets, if he chips away at that success and they start to get better and there starts to be some momentum, I think maybe that could be more long-term sustainable than with Vrabel, where guys definitely had the dread. Even when they were winning and it was fun, it beat guys down.
You just never know about Vrabel.
It just beat guys down. Vrabel's mood, and I don't know if people know this, I tried to keep a mood chart on the wall of the press box every day. We would rate him. Buck Rising ruined this because he let Vrabel know that there was a mood chart in the press box.
Of course he did.
And then, of course, Vrabel, would say, well, how's my mood today? And that ruined the thing. But I was going to keep a mood chart and then see how it reflected,
just wear a ring.
How they did. Because some of the former players said that, Vrabel, he was aware of it, but maybe not as aware of it as he needed to be. And even I felt this as somebody that was around him on a regular basis. He's such a big personality. His mood has an unbelievable bearing on the people around him, on those 53, on those 70 guys, on the press corps. on the lunch crew, on the PR staff. If Vrabel's in a good mood today, man, it's a fun place to be. And if he's in a shitty mood, man, this place sucks.
And most of that is a good thing. Most of the time, that was a good thing because.
But the thing is, it's unpredictable.
Yes,
right? The mood was not a result of a Monday morning after a win would usually be a shitty mood. And people were like, what is this?
It's about volatility. It's about volatility, I think. And what you're looking for is a little bit more flatline, but without being 3 yards in a cloud of dust in 2003, right?
Yeah. Like a little bit of predictability with an occasional surprise. That's kind of healthy, right? Oh, I'm surprised he's in a good mood today. Or, whoa, I didn't see him being a hard ass today. That's quite a surprise. But, and also the percentage of bad mood was high.
Yeah. All right. I do think it's fascinating. Look, the psychology of leadership is something that human beings have been studying now for hundreds of years, and they're going to continue to study it because it's fascinating. Everybody's different. Every coach is different. Every player is different. Every person is different. Every group and every dynamic is different, and it's difficult. It's hard. It's complicated stuff. And some people are very good at it, and some people everybody has strengths and weaknesses within their style of leadership. So it's just, I'm fascinated by that stuff, but I do think once you get everybody bought in for whatever that term means, I know it's cliche, that's when things start to happen. And so I think Callahan is I think there are just as many questions about Callahan as you would have asked about Vrabel. They're just the opposite end of the spectrum. And he said this, I think he's gone out of his way to say this, where he says, oh, there's moments where I'll dog cuss a guy and I'll get on him. Like he goes out of his way to point out that, no, I can be that asshole when I need to be, because we've never seen it. Like, no,
and we've heard that a little bit from players, I think, when we've asked them. But it might take some prodding to get to that. Look, he is by nature a nice, affable guy,
honest, yeah.
And I think that's part of the reason most people around him want to see him succeed. Let's see a good guy win. Look, I used to write that when I covered the AFC South. Tony Dungy was the Colts coach for much of that, and his arch rival was Bill Belichick. Well, take away the football and look at the men, and never minding what Bill Belichick's going through now. Who do you want to see win? The guy that doesn't scream and says, hey, I'm going to accommodate my coaches here so they could see their kid play Little League, or the guy who, seemingly would have his coaches be in the building 24 hours a day. And, you better get up at 4:00 in the morning if it's snowing in Boston to make sure you're in the building on time, because there's no conceivable excuse. Well, Tony Dungy's the more human person there. Now I'm not pitting Callahan against Vrabel that way, because Vrabel wasn't inhuman that way. You could call Vrabel and say, hey, I've got something going on. I'm going to be late. And as long as you didn't make a habit of it, he's completely cool about it. But there's a humanity of Brian Callahan that makes him
I agree.
worth rooting for.
Yeah. All right. So quickly here, what I want to get into what Peter Skaransky had to say both about offensive line development and Cam Ward as well. Sort of expectations around Cam Ward. Sinkers Beverages, Shotgun Willie's Barbecue. Support those great local businesses here in town. Again, Sinkers Beverages, 4-time liquor store of the year. Sign up for the in crowd. You'll get great access to really high quality stuff. I promise you, it's the best. Say hi to my guys, Grant and Joey over there. They got award-winning beer fridge with great craft local beer, as well as some of the great craft beer from around the area as well. Great, huge wine selection. And they got some experts over there that'll help you pick stuff out if you're like me and you have no idea what you're doing over in that section. So just check them out. They're great. And if you're in North Nashville up there in Hendersonville, Goettsville, Bluegrass Beverages, their sister store, over 50 years serving the community. So go check them out as well. Shotgun Willie's Barbecue, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Wednesday through Sunday. And both of them, again, special thanks to both of them for putting on our draft party a couple of weeks ago. Do appreciate that. First, before I get to Skoronski, quickly, what exactly is going on right now with the team in terms of like football? Like, we just talked about all this stuff, the culture and the development, the players. Like, what is actually going to happen? The rookies, I guess, will practice a little bit later on this week. We're going to see Cam Ward throw a football, which is great. And then, of course, I guess it's starting 2 weeks from now, we get actual stuff on the field with the whole team. Give us everybody what's actually happening right now.
Yeah, phase 2 starts today, Monday, of OTAs, and that's 3 weeks long. So coaches can now, phase 1 was mostly conditioning. Phase 2, coaches are with the players on the field for up to 90 minutes. no live contact, no one-on-ones. So, I mean, they can do some shadowy 11 on 11, 4 days a week. If you're there at least 3 days of the 4 days, you're paid $315 a day, which is something to some of these guys and nothing to some of these guys. I've got a tweet out that tells you a little bit more about what they can and can do. Perfect play drills, stuff like that. Rookies come in on Thursday for their 3-day mini camp, which is separate of this. And then they are allowed Monday to jump right in and join the veterans. So
next Monday we should get the whole Tennessee Titans group for whatever that is
together. But we I don't think we get to see any of phase 3, phase 2. Then phase 3 is when it's more like a regular practice, and we will get to see some of that.
Cool.
By rule,
right.
I believe.
Well, that's a lot of that is just, again, if you're new to the team, it's about language and installation and sort of understanding, all that good stuff. How does the practice schedule going to work? There's all kinds of logistics that you have to figure out. And then this week it kind of gets started with a little bit more actual development and coaching and what do we want you guys to do. All right. So Skoronski had a few things to say about Bill Callahan and Cam Ward. So this ties into some expectations around Cam Ward. This was Skoronski, and I think it's interesting, and I assume he was asked this question, but I think it's interesting that, even a guy like Skoronski, who has not taken a snap yet with Cam Ward, already understands that there's a balance here. Callahan has talked about it. Borgonzi has talked about it. There's a balance between letting a guy be the guy he is, the playmaker who extends plays and likes to make, across-the-body rollout throws down the field that were spectacular in college, and learning to get the ball out quickly and in rhythm and in the pocket. Here was Skaransky on Cam Ward's dichotomy and balance.
Kind of, there's a little bit of this and that, I think. One, sometimes you got to throw the damn ball. I think that's part of any great quarterback play, and I know Cam knows that. I've seen a lot of him getting the ball out quickly at Miami too. But then there's also, sometimes you do have to extend a play, and sometimes, quite frankly, it's tough shit for the O-line, and the quarterback's got to make a play, and if he does, he does, and Cam did that hell of a lot of times at Miami too. So I think you kind of just have to live with both things. You're not, got to let guys make plays. I see guys like Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, Mahomes, those guys get the ball up, but then they also extend plays for a while. So it's both. And no matter what, we're just going to have to do what we got to do.
I mean, that's a perfect encapsulation, right?
Right.
Bookmark that. That is the go-to quote for starters about what Cam Ward's going to be. Now, take it from there. It's Callahan's job to help put a governor on Cam Ward for when he's doing too much of the latter, too much of the extended plays. And we've talked about this. I think they're going to be, they'll be in second or third and 28 a couple times. Now, right. How many times, hopefully that's a couple times in the preseason and not very often in the regular season, but that's part of his downside. And when he can get a handle on that and minimize that, and you'll take a second and 28 a couple times in exchange for what he can turn into a big play, and gradually that'll go down.
Yeah. What I do think is, and I think the fact that he's clearly watched film, right, of Cam Ward, and clearly has seen the exact same things that all of us have seen. So I agree. It's a perfect encapsulation. And I do think we're going to do this many times where I say, what are reasonable expectations for Cam Ward in year number 1? And we've kind of talked about wins before. We've talked about Baker Mayfield's numbers and would fans take that over a 7-year career? Like, we've talked about a lot of that stuff. But I think in year number 1, I think fans need to set the bar, especially on the turnover stuff and this particular area of his game. I think you need to set the bar a little bit lower. I think you can set the bar high on some of the wow plays, some of the stuff where he just reads it and makes the thing happen. And then on the flip side, if you're going to get some of that, you're going to get the turnovers. You're going to get holding the ball a little too long, maybe a couple of strip sacks or something. Like, I do think you need to be careful with where your expectations are going to be in year number 1. When Peter Skoronski starts talking about Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes scrambling and extending plays, I don't know yet if Cam Ward has that ability in the NFL. I don't know.
Yeah, right. I mean, this is one of the places, and this is one of the things that makes it interesting. If he had played in the SEC or the Big Ten, I think we'd have a better feel than one season at Miami and a couple seasons at Washington State against lesser competition. And you can't hold it against the guy. He played against who he played against. But we don't have as good a blueprint for the talent he played against. I mean, who's the best team he played against?
I'll push back a little bit on this because I don't necessarily disagree with your basic point, but I think there are plenty of guys, Johnny Manziel, Tim Tebow, that were extraordinary. Braxton Miller in the Big Ten.
Sure. I'm not saying it's a guarantee if he played against those teams.
There are plenty of guys who were great athletes that extended plays in the high level of competition and
didn't mean anything.
And didn't mean anything in the NFL. Because I think the guys who did, I mean, Josh Allen did it against Mountain West competition. Lamar Jackson was probably the poster child for this. Also an ACC schedule, and was running around dominating. And it turns out Lamar Jackson is just that rare. And I don't think Cam's athletic ability, and this is not a knock on his athletic ability at all, it's not Lamar Jackson because no one else really is. Jalen Milroe, Michael Vick, Lamar Jackson, there's a handful of people ever in the last 30 years that have that level of athleticism that can do those things against NFL defensive athletes.
Yeah.
And so it's not a knock on Cam. I just don't know if he's got that.
No, that's a good point. And he's not going to make those plays running around. He's not a runner.
Right.
Not beyond the line of scrimmage. Now he could do some things on his side of the line of scrimmage to extend plays. I think it's very important that people not get in their head that he's going to be Josh Allen running with the ball or Mahomes or Lamar in terms of taking over the ball. He averaged 3 yards a carry.
I think Rodgers and Mahomes, they do things a little differently when it comes to scrambling. They are never looking to run ever. They run because that's the best option
and they see a lot of open space when they take off. They're like, oh my God, look at this void. There's a lot of places for me to go because of what's unfolded.
Andrew Luck was similar. You were not running first ever. You were running because that's the only thing that you had left to you, but you were extending to throw the football. And Lamar doesn't extend as much always to throw the football. Josh Allen has gotten better at that and has protected the football this past year better than ever. But I think there's a difference between Mahomes and Rodgers scrambling, which Cam Ward has said those are the guys he patterns his game off after. And honestly, I think that's good. That's the way his game is more patterned. It's not Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen. It's more like Rodgers and Mahomes if he's really good.
Very good point to what I said. All I'm saying is, given a choice of the evidence coming in, I'd like to see it at the highest level. Yeah. Because then you could say, look at him against, look at him shake Abdul Carter here and get out of trouble, as opposed to look at him shake, a lesser guy and get out of trouble. Not that, as you very well pointed out, not that is a guarantee of translation to the NFL one way or the other.
I think what's interesting is that there's going to be a lot of articles and a lot of people on radio and a lot of folks saying like, well, like 225 yards passing per game and 3-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. And if they win 7 games, I think you put a lot of benchmarks on it because it's easy to translate and to digest. I think it's very simple. If he is better at the things that Brian Callahan wants him to get good at the end of the season, then I think it's a successful year. If you can tell at the beginning of the year that he holds the ball a little too long, the processing isn't exactly the way it needs to be, and the accuracy is not exactly the way it needs to be, but by the last 5 to 6 games of the season, it is very clear that he has gotten better and learned about the speed of the game and learned what Brian Callahan wants him to do from an accuracy and processing standpoint. I think that's the expectation that I'm setting for Cam Ward. It's very nebulous and like word-oriented, not statistically oriented, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Okay. All right. All right. Peter Skaransky here talking about second year and learning techniques from Bill Callahan, not Brian, Bill Callahan.
I think just generally going to the offseason, I feel a little bit more comfortable with the techniques, so we're not so much learning so much of Bill Callahan stuff. So now I feel a little more confident in that. And then so, there's a few set variations I wanted to incorporate in my game and just a little more consistency in some of the run game. And so far we've done a good job of the staff's done a good job of kind of clearing things up for us as the offseason begins, which I think will help with some of my goals that I had of just sort of consistency and emphasizing some more aggression, physicality in the run game. But yeah, then a few things in pass pro in terms of just footwork and consistency. But yeah, I mean, there's always a million things I feel like in my head that I need to improve on. It's like hard to get them straight sometimes, but yeah.
I do appreciate like Peter Skaransky's like big kid element sometimes every now and then it comes out where he's just like, man, it's just so much stuff to keep straight in my head. Like he just kind of is like that. And I appreciate that. It's kind of charming. But again, the same question, like you're still moving parts around. You have 2 new faces from free agency. You're taking left tackle, moving him to right tackle. It is year 2. And at least 2 of the guys, plus however many games of Lloyd Cushenberry or however good he's going to be, there is some consistency there with Bill Callahan teaching in year 2. The permanent question for this organization, since Jack Conklin's 5th option year, I guess, or lack thereof, is this finally the year where the team goes from bottom third in the league to average to better than average to top 10? Like, what is this finally the year that it clicks on the offensive line?
I wrote after they added Williams and Zeitler that I don't want to hear in the first month of the season about still gelling and getting all of that. Certainly, they can be better in week 5 than they were in week 1. I expect that. But after week 1, if they play poorly, I don't want to hear about how they're still getting Bill's system down and all of that, right? Skaransky, Latham, and Cushenberry are a year in. We'll see where Lloyd comes back into this. And Williams and Zeitler are veterans who need to pick things up quickly, right? This line needs to be better right out of the gate. And we've talked about Brian Callahan's Titans tenure as a head coach maybe being on the hook for Cam Ward development, right? If he doesn't show sufficient progress in this year, that would be the number one thing that could cost Brian Callahan his job this year. We have not talked about this, and I'll put this down as the second thing. If this offensive line is not markedly better this year, that's not on Brian, that's on Bill. But I think that could be the number 2 fireable offense here. They've invested now 2 first-round picks and 3 significant free agent contracts. Zeitler not big, but Cushenberry significant.
Huge, yeah.
And Dan very significant, over 20 million average. If that group cannot effectively block for the run and protect Cam Ward, we know that Bill Callahan's been involved in selecting those players, and he is expected to shape those players. I think he had a rough first year, and I think he's an excellent offensive line coach. But if it does not translate in year 2, you got to have some questions.
I'm doing this off the top of my head, but that's ballpark $150 million and the 7th and the 11th overall pick for your 5 starters. Ballpark. Because $82 million for Moore, $56 for Cushenberry, and then like $10 for Zeitler, a 7th overall pick for Latham, and 11th for Skoronski. That's a lot of resources.
That's a bucket load of investment.
Yeah, you can't invest more than that in your 5 positions.
Well, John Robinson tried in terms of draft picks.
Yeah, that's true. He added another first-round pick in there. It didn't work. And a bunch of Andre, and there's a bunch of Andre Dillards. I mean, Rand tried too. Like, it's not like everybody's tried. It's just such a weird thing. Like, Cushenberry was a very good player, and then he has a freak accident in the middle, halfway through the season.
And they've also revamped the back end. Blake Hance, not a big contract, but ideally their swing tackle now. Jackson Slater, developmental interior guy, could be the next Cushenberry. If Cushenberry doesn't recover from this, should be the next Zeitler in a year if he pans out. They brought in some experienced backups, replenished the depth behind this so that they're not counting on Jalen Duncan, so that they could cut NPF. And Bill Callahan needs to develop these guys at the rate he was developing guys in Cleveland. Not that we're talking to these guys and they're saying, boy, I'm overwhelmed by this Bill Callahan stuff, and it's going to take me a long time to to understand what he's teaching me.
Yeah, I just remember in camp last year, we're all like obsessed with like the patents on the equipment. Well, now it's time for the equipment to get results. So,
Yeah.
I got. So again, there is no answer to that question. I think your answer is the correct one, which is there is a lot of pressure on this group and the coaches and the players who are the guys who are developing this group and the guys who have selected this group. A lot of pressure on all of them to get it right and to finally do something to help the quarterback and the rest of the offense. I got a random question for you. Shotgun Willie's Barbecue and Sinkers Beverages. Make sure you check them out. PaulKuharsky.com. Support good local journalism. Independent journalism is more important than ever in America right now, so make sure you can support it. So this is a random question that I think we'll probably explore more as camp unfolds. But I've been thinking about, because you've covered a lot of camps, and I'm curious, the number of rookies or prospects or free agents that I'm going to use the word flash, right? Because that's what we use. Oh, he's flashed in practice. Oh, he's flashed in preseason. That's the word we use. I'm curious if you think over time there has been a pretty relative direct correlation between guys that you saw instantly flash. I would say Jarvis Brownlee last year sort of quickly was put into positions to be a player on the team and contribute the way he has. And we saw him excel in those positions. How many of those times is the flash very real, and versus how many of those times is the flash total bullshit? Because I do feel like, since I've covered the team, it feels like the guys you see do it quickly right away, end up sort of working their way either into the contributor role or a special teams role or starting role or a backup role. And you can kind of see it right away. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I'd have to give it some thought over time, but the two guys that jump to mind are play the same position, slot receiver. Kyle Phillips, unbelievable training camp and practice player, and couldn't do it in games, couldn't stay healthy to do it in games. And Adam Humphries was pretty damn good in training camp and in practice. And he was even more hurt than Kyle Phillips. So those guys are two very similar players trying to solve the same problem and couldn't do it. Also, there's always, a couple of years ago, I'm going to forget, there are always receivers that people get excited about that don't pan out. I'm really turned off by fans that are like more into Xavier Restrepo now than they are into Shamari Dike and Elik Ayomanor. Yeah. I just don't get it. Like, all right, be enthusiastic about a guy, but how is Restrepo getting on the field?
So
I mean, they've got Tyler Lockett, who's definitely going to be a main piece of this offense, and DK, who's a 4th round draft pick in the slot. So for Restrepo to get reps in the slot beyond the practice squad, he's going to have to outplay those two guys in some way, shape, or form. What I see for Restrepo, and what would be good for Restrepo, is he replaces Mason Kinsey, whose ceiling has been reached and was not high enough. Did good work for them in that. Now Restrepo should be the receiver and the safety who's doing scout team and showing off his ceiling and saying a year from now, Tyler Lockett becomes unnecessary and DK can do this.
The two rookies that stand out to me, and actually there's a third one, but it doesn't prove my point as well, so I'll add him in a second. There's two rookies that stand out to me that I felt I noticed them at practice right away, quickly, and that turned into starting players, and that was Jayon Brown and Amani Hooker. I thought both those guys in camp, they weren't superstars, but when you get done with your notes every day and you go, man, Jayon Brown's out there with like the second team making plays all the time. Amani Hooker's out there behind Kevin Byard making plays all the time. They're putting him on special teams. This is a 4th round pick who's getting a lot of run and is doing well. I thought Brownlee did that last year. I thought Sweat did that a little bit last year as well. So I think there's names.
Elijah supposed to do it.
Right. Elijah Molden was another one that I thought, this guy looks like he knows what he's doing. Now, it didn't work out the way we thought, but right away at like his first practice, and part of that was my appreciation of him in college. I was like, man, it's a really heady guy. He's physical. He's a great tackler. He's going to do it. He's a Vrabel guy, right? And he was very good right away. You could trust him to be in the right place. Now, he wasn't explosive and he wasn't healthy, but I guess the question is less about like fans getting obsessed with the Restrepo, because they do. They get obsessed with the receivers. Bryce Oliver, I think, is that guy this year. Like, flashed last year. in training camp. We all kind of said, I don't know, we'll see. Kind of put him out of sight, out of mind. And then all of a sudden he comes up later in the year, flashed a little bit in the game. Okay, made a couple plays. Okay. I think he comes in this year, and ultimately the question is the flash the thing that is, how consistent does that deliver? And so that's what I'm keeping an eye on over the course of the next few weeks, is who looks like they belong right away, because that seems to be a pretty good indicator generally.
Yeah. And it's impressive what Bryce Oliver did, because I thought Bryce Oliver was very good in training camp, but he was consistently going against threes.
True.
Right. And so we talk about this at training camp. Like, that guy looks really good, but he's not had a chance against twos or ones. And so he's lighting up threes. He's lighting up guys that are mostly going to be insurance agents. And so, you know, how meaningful is that? Then he goes to the practice squad, and, you know, you don't really see him, and he's, you know, imitating receivers that they're going to see on Sunday, and you don't know anything. And so then when they pull him up, you know, out of necessity later in the season, you have no idea what to expect from him, really. And a lot of those guys don't do anything.
Right.
And Bryce Oliver did enough to get himself a chance here. And he's a guy with more of an opportunity to play based on the depth chart than Restrepo, to me. So
I think it'd be an interesting case study this summer, but also for maybe you to go back and if you have memories of, like, I don't know, even back in the early 2000s, like guys that like right away you're like, oh, that's pretty good.
Well, Drew Bennett was
there. You go.
Like that.
There you go. And so ultimately the question is just sort of like, how much do we trust some of the guys doing it in a certain way right out of the box, and how much is that a correlation to future success? And I do think it's probably greater than we realize. That there are plenty of guys that do it. And I'm not talking about the Jaquan Jacksons where it's like, oh, man, he made a bunch of plays against third stringers and then literally got into a couple of games and was terrible. It's like every time you see the guy, he's kind of just doing something better than you expect. He's a little bit more prepared, a little bit more productive than you think. Most of it's practice and preseason. But in Bryce Oliver's case, there was a trajectory, right? It was did pretty well in practice. Then he did pretty well in the preseason. And then when he was given his chance, he did okay in a game, and now he's got a chance to earn his way onto the depth chart full time. So it's just one of those kind of things that I'm going to be tracking this summer. Is like, oh, who stands out that you're just going, oh, that guy, he's in the right place. He's getting second team reps. Like Jalen Harrell early in the year last year was like that in camp, kind of, and then it just wasn't.
Well, I'd put him in the other column. Yeah, right. He's in the other column. He had a good preseason.
Right.
Rashad Weaver in the last couple of years had a couple good preseasons and camps, and fans anoint him, and then he turned into absolute zero in terms of production, and then he was cut.
Awesome stuff. All right, can't wait. We have football happening soon. Cam Ward will throw a football on Friday.
Let's not call it football. Let's call it.
He's gonna throw a football on Friday.
Practice. He'll throw a football either Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
And somebody will watch it. Somebody will be watching.
We will watch it one day. Yeah.
Hopefully Friday.
And it will be a cluster. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Braden very clearly is rooting for Friday.
Are you listening? Are you listening?
Stuff. I think they've moved towards last year it was Friday. So if they're consistent.
That's right. PK, always a pleasure, my guy. What do you got coming up on the website this week? You got a lot of stuff up there.
Enjoyed it. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly what direction I'm going, because I've got one big thing that I'm working on, but it'd be a little quick turn. A lot of topics that we talked about here will turn into stories, but go right now and check out very thoughtful and expansive piece by Mike Herndon on what the draft told him about what this organization thinks and how it operates now.
Yep. I like how he sees that stuff. Always a pleasure being your assignment desk and editorial sounding board. I'm honored to be that.
Good conversations. That's how it works, right? It goes both directions. So
go check it out. PaulKuharsky.com, Sinkers Beverages, and Shotgun Willie's Barbecue. Of course, Nick Suss will be back on Thursday. We'll be live on Thursday morning. Apologies for not being able to answer your questions in real time today, but had some stuff we had to get out of the way. So do appreciate you guys for being patient. Thumbs up, notifications turned on the YouTube page. Do appreciate you guys there. You can catch, of course, Paul's podcast on his YouTube page. And if you're listening on the podcast app of choice, please give us a review. That's how people find us. Tell everybody how great the Tennessee Titans coverage is at 440 Sports. So do appreciate you guys. For PK, I am Braden. Thanks for listening. We will talk to you later this week. Peace and love.